Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from the center of the US, or should I say the middle? One of those anyway, Sara Caldwell. Hey, Sara, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So Sara is an organizational anthropologist, and those words alone make me want to talk to Sara. And I'm sure you will see why in a second as we start discussing the questions that we go through. She's passionate about human-centered change. She helps organizations tackle tough problems, all while keeping things fun and engaging. Sara blends strategic thinking with empathy, turning challenges into opportunities. Agile values are what guide her, whether helping teams flow or wrangling her rescue pets or navigating the complexities of everyday life. Sara, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, thanks for introducing me and letting me be here to nerd out with you today. So I think everyone's journey to Scrum mastering is unique, and I follow along those same patterns as well. I've had a lot of different roles in my life. I was a dog trainer, accounts payable agent, recruiter, and many, many more positions across a lot of different industries.
Funnily enough, dog trainers also handle agility issues quite often.
They do in so many different ways related to the actual running through the hoops. And then also just trying to understand what behaviors owners or their guardians want from them. So I definitely borrow a lot of dog training concepts, not to say that people are dogs. It's really dog training is more about coaching people to train their dogs and not necessarily the dog behavior in itself. So I pulled a lot from that. That was a big, huge lesson that I learned because, quite honestly, I would tell my clients, it doesn't matter what I can do with your dog. It matters what you can do alone in your kitchen with your dog. And that was a huge lesson that has been really transferable into my Scrum mastering and Agile coaching roles.
So how did you get started? Were you then in some, inspiring moment, you decided to take the leap and started to learn about Scrum, Agile, and all things Scrum? How did you become a Scrum Master?
Yeah, I think it's several moments. So throughout all of my positions, I've really naturally gravitated to IT. And I am a curious person, I'm a problem solver, and I was often working in the business space. And we'd have this kind of concept of, I'm being a little dramatic here, but the sentiment is still the same. The lights would go off in the building, and everyone would say, "Oh, IT released again. IT can't get anything right." And I really started to get curious and peep my head over into the black box of IT and say, "Hey, what's going on there? Can I help? What are we doing?" And I had a number of positions where I was loosely associated with IT, maybe a liaison if you were, project management or business analyst. And then I started working for an organization that was really starting on their Agile journey. And, at that moment, I was serving as a project manager of sorts, where I had learned that, my project management style was more on operational efficiency and teaming over necessarily status updates. I wanted to connect the dots of the big picture with what we were doing at the local level. Just naturally, that's how my brain works. And, also I lean more towards naturally the growth mindset. But as a project manager, I had a little bit of that, but I also have the influence of this PMO rigor. And so while I was living in Agile mindset before I even knew what the words were for it, and I think it's important to note, I did have a lot of anti-patterns as well. I'm not saying I was the ideal Agile mindset. And that's because, my references, the people that I was talking to, the books that I was reading, the articles were all centered around PMBOK.
That's the project management body of knowledge, by the way.
Exactly, yeah. And then my experience of how, what I was reading in the book didn't really work for me in real life. But
Still doesn't, by the way.
And, but what I was doing was I was like, the process, I know the process, I follow the process, let's get on to the process. And, I knew that like face-to-face conversations and transparency was key, but I was still about the process, doing the process, doing the thing.
So what made the switch? What really kind of inspired you to take the leap into the agile side of the fence?
So I was working with an organization that started an Agile journey, and I went through an Agile boot camp and read Scrum, and like I was a changed person. And it's like everyone wrote down exactly what I was trying to do and gave me some tools and values to help me accomplish it. And like I was just immediately hooked, drank the Kool-Aid. And then these really helped me understand it wasn't about the process, but it was about creating a system that people. Creating a system that worked for people who are also in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that understanding kind of switches our, I guess, perspective on what is happening. We look at the same events in a different way, but it still takes a long time before we can really grasp what Agile is all about, especially if we have a background in project management. And of course, I speak for myself here because that's my background. I started as a project manager as well. So, Sara, tell us one story of one of those moments where you were still realizing what that shift in perspective meant in practice. And as we all do, of course, things just didn't go as you expected. So tell us that story first. We'll dive into the takeaways later, but tell us the story.
All right. So I was working with the organization that was starting their Agile transformation. And I was roughly like about, a year in. I was helping running PI planning events. I was, helping teams work through the mindset shift from the way they were previously working to this new way of working to remove organizational impediments, is really hyper focused on the team and helping them figure out, all the ways that they could succeed, and helping explore topics that they wanted to get a little bit more curious about, working with team dynamics. But what I ended up, ultimately struggling with was understanding that I was part of a larger system and appreciating how the different other elements that we were a part of were experiencing this change. And oftentimes, I typically find it's the roles that aren't clearly identified in the Scrum guide that feel kind of threatened related to some of these changes.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So through my experience, I found it's the leaders, it's the project managers, it's the business analysts. They often, are kind of glossed aside, maybe by design in the Scrum guide. And sometimes as Scrum masters, as Agile coaches, if we're not leaning into some of that uncomfortability and uncertainty that they're experiencing, we can accidentally cause, some friction. So for example, during that time where I was spending about a year and a half with this organization undergoing a transformation, I would, and I was hyper focused on the team. I would send an email or have a conversation with leaders and project managers and the PMO, and felt that I was receiving some like subtle backlash, like some dirty yeses. Felt like we were on the same page, but then like things would happen where it would indicate that we're not. And I really couldn't figure out what was going on. And I had just like reached my like wit's end. And I decided to go on what I now refer to as a vulnerability tour, where I essentially was just really vulnerable about my feelings and not feeling supported, and just like going to each leader and saying, what am I doing that is frustrating? What am I doing that's not working? Help me understand. And each leader had something different, but like ultimately they didn't feel that I was working with them. Like they felt that I was kind of boxing them out of the team. Like, you can't go to the retros, you can't go to the stand-up, you can't go to all these things. And that made them feel uncertain and didn't know where their place was. So that was one of the biggest lessons.
And I think that's a very fair feeling for them to have, because literally that is how Scrum works, right? Let's call it the traditional hierarchical leaders have little influence or even participation in the day-to-day of a Scrum team, with the exception of the product owner, the Scrum master, and the stakeholders involved in the demos or reviews. There's very little mention in the Scrum guide about how to interact with and engage other stakeholders. And this reminds me of one of the few things that I think are really, really valuable from project management, which is the whole stakeholder and communication aspect of the PMBOK, which I think all Scrum Masters would benefit from reading about and learning more about, because it is a key part of our work to work with these other stakeholders that are not the product owner or direct quote unquote customer representatives that come to the review, but they might be hierarchical leaders who have line responsibility over that and other teams and want to still be involved and perhaps don't know how to anymore when Scrum comes in.
100%, right? They feel that they were still responsible for what the team was producing, but were feeling boxed out. And I love your suggestion of having, Scrum Masters get more curious about who are the other players in their system. It's not just their team, it's a whole system in which we operate in. And there are really great tools out there like Friend or Foe from Liberating Structures and the PMBOK of stakeholder management, and that I think are, to your point, really great for all change agents to be able to appreciate and identify.
Yeah, being a project manager by training, one of the things that I found quite sad when I finally left that background and started my Agile journey is that we have lost some of the best things that came from the project management movement, especially later, right? Like in the 90s and early 2000s, which are all the aspects that are related to managing the social system around the project, right? Like stakeholder management, communication plan, and all of that, which as Scrum Masters, we are not necessarily exposed to those ideas because they are not in the Scrum Guide, right? The Scrum Guide is very clear. There's team and there's outside the team. And outside the team, there's a product owner who interfaces with the customer and brings their insights. And then there's a few people who come to the review. That's it. That's what Scrum is, right? Everything else that exists in a standard organization is not accounted for, but we need to account for that as Scrum Masters.
Yeah, such a great point. It reminds me of that people aren't the process, right?
People aren't the process. That's such a beautiful way to end this episode. Thank you for that, Sara.
Yeah, thank you.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.